The next speaker is Samuel Roturier. He's working at the University of Paris, and he is going to tell us about how fires are influencing boreal areas in Sweden.
Thank you. Hello everybody, my name is Samuel Roturier from Paris University, but I've been working with Swedish colleagues for many years. And I would like to present the first results of an experiment that was aiming at restoring reindeer lichen pastures. That was aiming at restoring reindeer lichen pastures after fire in boreal Sweden from an ecological perspective, but also from a social perspective. So my first slide has apparently nothing to do with fire. It's a snowy landscape with reindeer in the boreal forest, but actually the fire regimes of the boreal forest strongly influence the ground reindeer lichen that is the most important feeding resource for reindeer during winter. Also, fire virtually burns out all the lichen for several decades. There are now strong evidences that lichen-rich forests are the results of repeated fire. In a seminal paper from '77, it was shown that before fire suppression, the mean time between fires in lichen-rich dry pine forest was 50 years, and nowadays the expected return intervals are now hundreds or thousands of years. Because as for many other regions in the world, effective fire suppression started during the 19th century to protect timber resources. In the absence of fire, the productivity of forest soils increased, and resulting in less favorable habitats for reindeer lichen, and thus resulting in a decrease of winter grazing areas for reindeer husbandry. Because reindeer in Scandinavia and in Sweden in particular are herded by the indigenous Sami people who have a very tight cultural, ecological and economical relationship with the reindeers since very long. To herd their reindeer, they need free access to very large areas, and conflicts have occurred, and conflicts still occur with other land users, such as forestry. During the 20th century, traditional reindeer husbandry has been challenged by commercial forestry in many ways, but it's only during the last decade that the effects of fire suppression on lichen has been clearly addressed. Reindeer lichen is actually a functional group of different species that are growing, forming very extensive lichen mat on the ground. They are extremely brittle when they are dry, and they naturally disperse by fragmentation. After fire, reindeer lichen come back after 20 to 30 years, and it takes about 1 century for them to reach a maximum biomass. So to contribute to this issue, we conducted a collaborative research program together with the Swedish National Forest Company and with a reindeer herding community in northern Sweden. And we wanted to address whether we can restore reindeer lichen pastures after fire. So our overall hypothesis was that although reindeer lichen are late successional species, they could successfully establish and compete with other plant species on burned soils. So our aim was to test the use of prescribed burning to restore the fire disturbance, and at the same time to accelerate the recovery of reindeer lichen by dispersing lichen fragments. So this was investigated in a field experiment that we established in 2008, so 2 years after a very large fire, one of the largest fire in Swedish modern history. We collected 17 cubic meters of lichen that we fragmented and that we dispersed in an area of about 1 hectare according to different treatments that included different doses of lichen, different seasons of dispersal, not seasons of fire, but seasons of dispersal, different light environments, and different substrate conditions that were a proxy of fire intensity. And we measured the establishment of lichen and the fragment density in permanent plots. So what are the results? Well, basically the main result is that the establishment of lichen significantly increased over time, as shown by the green and the blue lines, and while in the same time in the control plots where we hadn't dispersed any lichen, there was no lichen 10 years after fire. So the lines here actually show the average area of occupancy in % of free viable fragments and of established growing fragments. So for instance, in 2008, when we dispersed the lichen, the 100% of the area was occupied by free viable fragments, and none of them were established. But what we can observe is that during the first year, there was a very strong mortality of the lichen that we have dispersed, but at the same time, the lichen did establish very rapidly and kept increasing until it reached a plateau around 70–80%. And you can also see the bars show you the fragment density per surface unit. So this is the average result, and there was, of course, many significant effects. I won't go too much into details, and I will just show you a couple of pictures. So this picture is actually from the site with the harshest conditions with respect to wind and temperature for lichen. It was also the site where fire intensity was the highest, but still 70% of the area was occupied by established fragments. And we could also see some new shoots of lichen growing. And this picture is from the site that actually provided the best conditions for lichen to grow, especially regarding light environment. And here, 85% of the area was occupied by established fragment. And actually, the lichen cover here already exceed the cover in unburnt area in forest nearby. And you can also see on this picture the difference between the area that we dispersed, where there is already a functional growing lichen mat, and the area outside of the experiment. So the other results I would like to briefly reflect on is the effect that this research project had on the two partners, on the forest managers and on the reindeer herders. And I will briefly argue why it can be necessary to bridge scientific and indigenous knowledge to restore, in ecological restoration project. And we believe it's a result in its own because the social issue remains a key issue in fire management. So Granström and Nick Lachon summarized the relationships between man and fire regime in the boreal forest over history. And the question we can address is what next? Biodiversity conservation, fire is a clear issue for biodiversity conservation in Sweden, and I think there will be a talk about that tomorrow. To a lower extent, it also involves forest companies who are bound by environmental standards, such as the FSC certification system, to burn 5% of the area they harvest each year. And of course, it can involve reindeer husbandry who can benefit from fire as they did in the past. So in this project, we involved from the earliest stages reindeer herders and forest manager, and the results were beyond our expectation. On these pictures, you can see reindeer herders and forest manager planning the experiment that I've just described. There are also pictures from a field trip that we organized with forest companies from northern Sweden and with other reindeer herding communities. And there is also a very interesting picture in the center that is a machine that was designed by the Swedish forest company to disperse more effectively lichen on burnt soil. So first of all, the Sami really appropriated the experiment and referred to it as a management option that could satisfy their needs. So by doing this, it rebalanced the relationship between the partners in a land use conflict that on the whole remains very unbalanced. For the forest managers, there was a constant objective of applying the results to operational forestry, and that was very, very stimulating. And it also generated new experiments that we actually established together. So by doing all of this, it reversed actually the conventional epistemological realms and roles of the two partners, and that was very, very interesting. And finally, the most unexpected result, I must say, was that this experiment, this project, stimulated the diffusion of the idea of prescribed burning within the forest company and within the Sami communities. So for all these reasons, it was a process, we can talk about a process of co-production of knowledge, that is the generation of new knowledge based on both scientific and indigenous knowledge. So to conclude, prescribed burning associated with lichen dispersal can contribute to restoring reindeer winter pastures. That's the ecological part of my talk. Of course, there are still many questions and things to follow up, such as what will be the effects of vegetation on lichen during later successional stages. And second, field experiments can constitute a first step towards knowledge co-production and further adaptive co-management in a context that can be quite conflictual as the one I described, and because restoring socio-ecological system includes also restoring associated knowledge and practices. Thank you.
Many thanks for this interesting and very different talks and many things we heard before. Are there some time for questions? Yes, please.
Hi, Davide Ascoli, University of Naples. Thanks for your interesting presentation. I saw in the picture there are, after the fire, there were sites with salvage logging, so the stumps were cut and wood was taken out from the forest, and sites with the trees remained. And so I was wondering if this factor was considered in your analysis and if it had an effect on the lichen establishment. So if their variance in lichens establishment was dependent significantly on coarse woody debris.
Yeah, absolutely. We took that factor into account. That's the different light environments I talked about. And actually, the light environment where the trees were left correspond to the optimal light environment for lichen growth. So that was very interesting, and that also correspond to the tree density after a natural fire. So that was very interesting, and the effects on lichen, of course, were very much different. It grew much better under the trees at such density, which was 30% canopy cover.
Okay, well, I think that we will move on now. Thank you very much.